Hey guys, this is part 2 of the sewer. We're going to continue the work in Dungeondraft today. We're not ready to put things into Foundry just yet. You're just seeing just a summary or just some examples of what's in this sewer when it finally gets into the Foundry platform. So animation and some other stuff. You're not seeing in this highlight reel some of the other things. So go back to part 1, just the first couple of minutes, if you want to see everything that's going to go into this map when it finally goes into Foundry. But today we're going to really do more of the visual design here. We did a lot of the blocking and laying out of things. We worked out the logic for how these pipes are going to connect. Today we're going to do the visual design. So you see, I just turned on the background. I turned on the terrain tool. And I've already painted this canvas with two very basic terrains. I'll describe them here. One is the herringbone brick. And then I took the cave floor and I painted that around the brick. And I just merged the two together in a way that made the brick look dirty. And it gives a really nice effect. And this is an effect that you can't get if you're just using the normal tool or the normal floor patterns inside of Dungeondraft. And so that's why I did it this way. And you can see already just painting some of these shadows over it immediately pops these rooms out. And it creates a nice effect. And the end result of the map is a really nice map. As I'm going around these corners with this shadow tool, I'm putting multiple points in. By the way, it'll help you avoid some of those spiky lines that get created when you go around sharp corners. And then I'm just deleting some of these, throwaway pieces of floor. And I'm going in and I'm essentially just making all of my rooms three-dimensional now. And if you guys watch my series, I do this step pretty early on just to give me a sense of space. And we'll go around for the rest of these and do this. I'm going to put those corner pieces in. These are objects set at the same exact size as my path. So my path is set to 1 width, and these corner shadows are set to 1 width as well. I'm using 60% opacity on both. And that's going to make sure that they snap together really nicely and don't leave a seam. Notice I'm struggling to select this piece of floor here. I actually had to restart it. You didn't see that here, but I had to restart Foundry or Dungeondraft, and you'll see you have to do that in some cases. I'm using the spline tool with my path just to make sure that it goes evenly around that circle. And I just love this part of the process, this part where this map just pops out and it starts to feel like a three-dimensional space that we're working in. Again, using the spline tool here. And remember what I did with the walls last time? I had them end in the middle of the room there. You want to do that again because you want this also to be a perfect circle, these paths, just like the walls were. And the only way to do that is to draw your spline all the way to the end of that curve. And I'll do the same thing. These are all just 4 separate segments. I'll delete these paths. Now the tricky thing here is getting these paths to end at a right angle without causing that spiking effect. So I'm just playing around with it. I'm playing around with the endpoint at the end of that path. I'm drawing back the endpoint that's just before it. And I'm massaging everything just to try to get it to be that really good right angle. Because again, I'm gonna put that shadow object in here to finish off where these paths meet. I just really like how these rooms are already starting to set out or set in. Now I'm evaluating this space here. And what I want this to be is some kind of collection tank for excess water runoff. But I want to keep that floor. I think that floor looks really good. It's just a really crusty, dirty brick. I think it goes well in a sewer. But what I need to do then is I need to invent some variation to it using the shadow tool. So you can see just here, I've essentially invented a lip. Now I'm not particularly happy with this, but that's what I'm setting out to do here, is creating some artificial variation of this space. And I want it to be like the water is running out of the top pipe and it's running into a groove. And then that groove runs into a deeper basin. And so there's this relationship between that groove and this basin below that I'm trying to establish with these shadows. I don't have to get it perfect. I have to get it believable enough so that the player walking in here is going to understand what's going on with this terrain. And I think I've created a pretty good relationship here. I'm going to use the wibbly wobbly line to more define the edges of this masonry. And of course, once you start getting paths that are crossing over each other like this, you're going to have some tricky situations of getting to the paths that you want. In this case, I want to delete that wibbly wobbly line from this bottom edge, but I don't want to delete the shading. And since I'm really just trying to establish how I want this room to look, I know I have another room that may use the same technique. I'm grabbing this wall. There's one wall in Forgotten Adventures that is this strange, I think it's called a castle wall, but it's hand drawn, and you can see that it's sort of looking down at a wall that maybe has a gradation to it. And what I did was I changed the color of this, and I used blue. The wall itself comes in sort of a yellowish green, and so if I want it to match this terrain around it, I'm going to have to go blue. So don't forget that you can change the hue of any wall and floor piece to try to match what you've got. And now I've got this groove here, so I'm going to do something crazy. I'm doing this so you guys can see how much you can force your own will onto these assets. But I'm essentially drawing my own wall using the other wall as a guide, because I feel like this groove would cut into this wall here. And you can see I even created a polygon underneath it, and I used, in my color picker, I just grabbed a color from the bottom part of the sort of the shaded part of the wall. And you don't have to get it perfect. By the way, here, I needed to change this color of this pattern, just using some stock Dungeon Draft stuff. But to grab it, I needed to go to edit points. I needed to drag a point out where I could actually grab that piece of floor. Then I finally set it to where I want, and I delete that extra point, and it sucks it all back into the original shape. So that may seem crazy to you guys, but I did want to show you that technique, because you will find that you want to force something at some point. And between the wibbly wobbly line and your pattern shape tool, you can really create anything that you want. And you shouldn't be afraid of trying that. There, I made a mistake, of course. I shouldn't have drawn those top lines. But I'm just repeating the process that I did before. I'm using this shape because it's got also some line art in it for this particular pattern. I don't usually use stock Dungeon Draft stuff, but in this case, it works well. Grabbing that color, changing it, and then grabbing it again so I can match it over on the other side. And I kind of like that. I like how this turned out. I do, however, I want to mess up the edges of this a little bit. So I'm going to my overlay effects. I'm picking a couple of alternating colors. I'm making them semi-transparent. And I'm just painting them along the edges here. It's too solid of lines for me. I thought it contrasted a little too much with the grubby brick background. And now what I want to do is experiment with water. I'm going to put some water over some of the areas of this map. And I'm looking for a water that creates a contrast. If your whole map is the same color, like all the color gray, just doesn't create enough contrast for me. I find it more interesting if you can get it to be a different color. And so you can see I'm using a semi-transparent water here so that I can put things underneath it that look like they're underwater. But I'm coming up with something here. I landed on something that just looks dirty. If I ever want to come back into this map and I want to change that, I can. And now that I've got that water, I'm going to look at where I want that water to actually be. Well, actually, first here, I'm going to create some foam effects. And I'm gonna probably revisit these foam effects multiple times, even after this series. One of the problems with foam and water like this is the foam's a little too light. And by the way, I haven't done a lot of playing around with like waterfalls and things like that. I don't do a whole lot of natural stuff, so I'm experimenting here. Some of you may have really good techniques for this. I'm just experimenting with the water paths that are available and seeing what could work here. Of course, there's this waterfall path that's available. I think it's with Forgotten Adventures. And I'll stick with this path for now. I put it underneath that water to try to darken it, and then brought it back up again to see if I liked it lighter. I'm going to go ahead and roll with that for this map in general for now, but that's one of the things that I'll be revisiting later before I go to publish. So the water is going to be flowing through the pipes. When I get this into Foundry, I'm going to use some really special effects to make that water animate. And I'm going to use a macro that as a token moves through that water, it'll create a splashing sound. So I don't want the water going through the entire map. There are certain places where I want it to go. Here again, I want to make it look like there's some interesting masonry down below. So I'm going to use my path. In this case, I used it below the water. You could use it above the water too if you wanted it to stand out more. And then I used my wibbly wobbly line to define that rectangle. You can't see it in this video likely, but I'm helping define that rectangle a little bit more closely. And now in here, I want water coming through this area, but I want some bridges. I want some ways for tokens to navigate this area without having to splash through water. And I just want to make it look like it's got a relationship to some of these pipes. Make sure my pipes are all over the wall line there. Use my wibbly wobbly line to define the edges of this. It's a subtle change, and you'll often forget it because with the grid turned on, you can miss, you know, the edges just kind of blend together, but it's just a good tactic to use the wibbly wobbly line to define the edge. Using my same shadows, you know, width of 1, 60%. And you notice here also, I'm making these bridges look slightly rounded. And you can do that with very simple technique of just using shadows on both sides of it, facing in. So now those little bridges look like they're rounded off a little bit, so maybe the water can go underneath them. I'm putting in my corner pieces, and you may be afraid of getting really dark. Well, that's what happens when you get into tight spaces, things get darker. So don't be afraid of, you know, putting these shadows in where they belong. And now I'm thinking about how a player accesses this room with that water there. So I'm creating an access way for tokens to be able to move into that room. Of course, I have to solve my problems with, you know, all the other shadows I've already placed and get those all sorted out. And we've got a nice access method. Same strategy as before. I've got my wibbly wobbly line set to a width of 1. It's a very strong, bold line. You can see it. Did my same strategy with the rounded walkway. I'm going to put a little shading underneath these pipes. Never forget, if you have physical objects, you want to consider how the light is going to occlude around them. I think I'll have water flowing through one to the other. So I've got this sort of route that water is going to flow through in this map. It's going to come from the bottom left corner. It's going to flow right and up. It's going to go through these routes here. And in this case, I'm making that water flow through this pipe and into what will be a holding tank. So I know I want this to be a tank now. Now I have to actually design it to look metallic. I'm looking at the lid. Will the lid serve as a base? Not really. Considering the metal floor piece, don't really like the design of that though. It's not as good as the rest of the metallic objects that we're finding here. And then what I want to do is change this stone wall into a metal wall. So I've changed it to metal, but I don't want I want the metal to match the, you know, this sort of rusted bronze kind of metal that's going through the rest of the map. And so I'm playing with the coloring of it, and I landed on one that's pretty close. And then I took that hex code and I put that, you didn't see it here, but I put it in a little notepad I have sitting over to the side. I'm going to use that hex code later. Here for the bottom, I used a stair element. It's got a better design that matches better this metal. And then I used just the bottom of a cage. Between those two pieces, I've got what I think is a fairly convincing bottom of a tank. And then I can put some water on top of that using the same hex codes of my other water and make it semi-transparent. And now I've got a tank that's semi-filled with water, and a player can stumble into there and get trapped and almost drowned and have a ton of fun with that. Now here I'm thinking the water continues to flow through that tank. But, you know, on reflection, I think I'll get rid of that. I think the water will stop at that tank and it'll be dry if they escape it, if you will. I'm just getting familiar with my assets and what I'm going to use here. Considering whether I block off this side or not, I've decided against it. I think what I'd rather have is be able to add valves and things later, because all of this artwork is available in Molinet. You can decide where you want to put valves and blockages and things like that in this pipe system later. You can do it really liberally wherever you want to. So rather than forcing a DM to consider how I've designed the gameplay, I really want to leave it open to that individual to decide how they want to do it themselves. And Molinet is just a great tool for us DMs to be able to decide that. They continue this water flowing also to the right, the main pipe being in the bottom left of the map. We'll use some of the same decisions here. You'll notice I'm not drawing the big shadow on the right side. I feel like the water, if it's going to flow through these pipes, it's going to have to be more shallow on the right, less shallow on the left. So I'm considering how the light, or how to make this logical, even if it's only logical in my mind, if nobody else notices it. I think it's important. You can see my shadows on the right as they're going into the pipe or more shallow. Put some wibbly wobbly line in here. And here we're going to try again to use these waterfalls. As I'm putting these in, I don't really realize it at the time, but I think these waterfalls are actually upside down. And that's one reason why I'll want to come back and address these. I think the waterfall is supposed to create that foam at the bottom. But I'm not terribly happy with this asset in general. I hope we get more options for this, or I may try to see if, like the Gorgon, for example, can create an animated waterfall that actually makes me happy. He's really good at this stuff. I'm seeing if I want to use that same brick method here as I did before. Realizing I'm drawing these upside down, the shadow should be towards the bottom of this trench here. And I kind of like this, but it's got one major problem. Is how does the water flow? I could try to cut out a hole, like a tunnel through there. I've decided I like how I've been doing it, and so I'm going to make this chamber look a lot like the other ones. Same strategy of the wibbly wobbly line on top of the shading there. And now, of course, I'm missing an egress. There's no way to get to the room up above except through the pipe. So I'm going to create a hallway here. And I'm going to make this hallway so that it's still a narrow hallway. It's only one actual square in width, but it's got a half square on either side. And it's just going to make the hallway feel just a little bit bigger. It's not going to feel quite as claustrophobic as it would otherwise. And I'm just going by edit points tool for my wall and I'm moving things around. So that's it for today. In the next one, we'll get even more detail into the design of this, but hopefully you guys picked up some new tricks, and we'll see you in part 3.